Hello, everyone, and welcome to Targeted Talks, Leaders in Oncology, episode 3. It's come around quickly, and today in the hot seat we've got the brilliant Eliel Bayever, who's going to give us a run through of his amazing career journey, I'm sure. So, how's things, Eliel? How are you keeping?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Jamie.
Good, good, good. Thank you for joining us and being our third guest. It's a pleasure to always chat to you, especially on camera. I mean, me and you have gone way back now. I think how long have we known each other for now? Three or 4 years, something like that.
At least 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, time flies when you're having fun. I think that the purpose of today was, I really wanted to let our listeners know a little bit more about your career journey. And you've obviously worked for some amazing companies, big pharma, small biotech, and I'm sure have seen and learned a lot. So I'd like to uncover some of that. I'm going to test you and see how far you remember and take you all the way back to the kind of start of your career, and kind of talk to you as an early doctor. I know you've also moved around internationally as well and lived in different countries, which is really exciting. So talk to me about, you kind of getting into the industry and what inspired you right early on, Eliel as a young guy getting into the industry. What kind of was what was that driver?
I'm probably a little bit an outlier there in that I started in the industry probably a lot later than most folks, most medical people in the industry. That is, I was in clinical medicine for a long time before I decided to make the change. So it was actually a result of a midlife crisis, because I was taking care of pediatric children with deadly diseases and doing bone marrow transplants. And even although all of those children would have done really poorly without the transplant, I got to a point where I was really worrying more about those who didn't make it than being pleased about those who made it. And I realized I had some of the symptoms of burnout, and I needed to have a change in direction in my career. And that the thought, after careful thought, what could I do with what I knew and what I had experience in, a career and industry popped up. And I was very pleased to make that decision. But it was difficult because again it was midlife rather than shortly after specialty training. So there's a little more skepticism in folks giving me my first opportunity, because there was always a concern about how well I'd survive in a corporate environment versus
Mm.
working in a hospital and academic environment. But the first person who took the risk took me on, and I enjoyed it very much and learned a lot and continued to learn all the way during the career, including up till now.
Amazing. So you are, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, an oncologist, obviously treating cancer patients, which you've just mentioned there. For those that might not necessarily know what the term oncologist means, what does that mean?
Well, actually, in fact, I have an extended title. It's a pediatric hematologist oncologist. So that makes me my special my specialty was blood diseases. That's the hematology side. Oncology, that's the study of cancer and its treatment. So pediatric children, blood diseases, and cancer treatment.
Brilliant. So you then obviously mentioned that you're unsure how you would feel coming into the corporate world, and I'm sure quite a lot of doctors perhaps might feel like that because it's two completely different environments. Being in a hospital or being in an office or working out of your home office, which is more apparent these days.
Right.
How did you find that transition from facing patients to them, designing clinical trials essentially?
That probably was the most difficult adjustment to make because, first of all, within the hospital environment, there's a very clear pecking order. And once you reach a certain level, you're the last resort. You don't have to answer to other people. You have to answer to your patients, of course, but you don't have a manager as well. Getting into a corporate environment, you have that corporate structure, and you've got a senior person within your company, or you have to report to a board of directors. There's always someone above you taking care of you. And so there's the issue of managing up, and I had to learn about, rather than just be concerned about managing down and being nice to the people around you who are supporting you. And I think for me, that was the biggest adjustment, is being in that environment, always being answerable to someone above you and having to feed them in a certain way that makes them satisfied that your job is being done correctly.
managing upwards and downwards and all of your peers is a challenge in all walks of life. So it's an interesting one that's kind of the biggest challenge that you took. What about the actual scope of the two different roles? How did you feel about the different type of work? Because the two roles are very different, although you need the medical doctor degree. So how did you find that transition of completely different job?
That was a huge difference because one of the things about being a successful clinician, being a doctor in a hospital, one thinks that one has all the skills that the industry would need, and once you move into industry, you'd be a gift to industry, and really you'd just be teaching them rather than the other way around. And after the first year in industry, I learned that I really was at the very bottom of the barrel, and I had to learn on a very steep learning curve because it was very, very different environment. Drug development, whether it's in oncology or anything else, is a learned skill. There are no easy ways. There are no books you can read on how to do it. There are no lectures you can go to. It's really just experience and learning from people who have been there and done that already. So it was very different from being in the clinic where you can go to a book or a lecture and learn how to do it.
Going to say there is completely different. And how did you go about, not necessarily being so successful, but like you say, you have books or potentially mentors in the clinic, and then you've come into the industry, bottom of the pile, you're learning the ropes. Apart from just throwing yourself into the deep end and perhaps making some mistakes, which I'm sure you did, and I'm sure other people as well have done that. What advice would you give people that have now kind of coming into that role and made that transition or about to make that transition?
You mentioned mentor, and you can have a mentor who's a superior, and a mentor who's a peer, and a mentor who's I don't want to say inferior, but perhaps on a lower level than you. You can learn from everyone. So that's probably the most important thing. You're living in an environment with people that have lots of different skills. You need to be respectful. You need to listen to them. You need to accept the advice and the information that they give you, process it, and start learning how to do it as well, or at least better than everyone else. So it's really learning from the people around you and then learning from your own experience.
I was speaking in one of the second episode that we done with another physician called Elizabeth, and she talked about mentors and having people around you that you can rely on. And actually, in one of the other episodes as well, we spoke about mentors with Mick Grant, and I think that's really apparent in the industry at the moment is having good people around you. If they're more senior than you on paper or been in the industry longer or like you say, metaphorically more junior, I think having good people around you is really important to help you succeed, right?
Absolutely, and it's not just the people within your own company, because a huge part of your job is getting your drug reviewed and approved at the end of the day for marketing. It's the regulatory authorities as well, and they have some really super people at the EMA, the FDA. Those are people you can learn from as well. They too come with different skills from a different angle, and again, learning process is really important because that helps smooth your way into your job and being successful and getting drugs approved.
Cool, great, good advice. I'm gonna skip out kind of a big bulk of your career where you've obviously worked for the likes of J&J, Glenmark as well. I want to get to the bit where you've can't become a chief medical officer, because a lot of physicians that I talk to when I'm talking about their 5-year plan, 10-year plan, what's the future look like for them, whatever level they're at, if they're a medical doctor, VP, the end goal is always to be, I want to become a chief medical officer. Normally that is what I get 9 times out of 10. So you've obviously managed to achieve that, which is amazing. So you were at Glenmark as a VP, oncology build out, if I'm not mistaken. Then you've obviously joined a small biotech or certainly a smaller company anyhow than Glenmark. So talk to me about that transition and how you found that.
Well, when I started, I started, as I mentioned before, I started much later than most folks. I had to scramble up the ladder and learn very quickly. And what I recognized very soon was that there are two learning environments, Big pharma is established. They do things properly. Things are designed well. You have all the pieces in place. And as the companies get smaller and smaller, there are pieces missing, pieces that have to be filled in. But you have to have that big picture and know what the real structure looks like. From a big company, from a big pharmaceutical environment, before you can go into the small environments. So I think what's very important, what I found very useful, is getting really good seasoning early on in your career in the big pharma environment, and then you know what's needed. You know how things are done in a perfect way. And then when you go down to a smaller company where you have fewer personnel, fewer people with expertise, you know what's needed. You can bring in the expertise if you don't have it, or if you developed it yourself, you can add it in to your day-to-day activities within a small company. So that to me was important. And as I went through from big pharma and then scaled down to the smaller biotech, I did what I could to attain increasing responsibilities and move up the ladder to chief medical officer.
Excellent. I definitely think it's really beneficial for all physicians to have that big pharma background. I know there are a few that don't, and they have some really interesting profiles, but like you say, being able to learn where a company has lots of resources is definitely beneficial for someone who's, looking to progress up through the ladder. So what's the differences in the two roles from VP to Chief Medical Officer, apart from kind of the obvious change in title and, you were kind of at the top of the food chain? Was there any real differences in responsibilities from when you were at Glenmark and then moved into, your first CMO gig?
Getting into becoming chief medical officer means that you're the last medical resource. So you really are in charge and you take responsibility for everything that's medical. But it's really just an expansion and a consolidation of what you've been doing all along. What's very different though is you become a member of the so-called C-suite, and then you interact with a chief financial officer, chief operational officer, chief executive officer. So you're getting out of your medical world into a much broader management role. And in addition to that, there's more interaction with the board of directors as well. And all of these are separate skills. You're dealing with peers with very different skills, and a board that sometimes is very business oriented, but really knows very little about the day-to-day activities of the company, and particularly the science of what you're doing. So learning that and learning how to present yourself and learning how to present the requirements that you need to conduct your role professionally it is something that you have to learn as well. And then the other thing is if you're in a small biotech, is the investing. It's the investment community and raising money. And again, that's a separate skill, because presenting to your scientific colleagues is one thing, and you do that with a lot of ease. Presenting to the investment community is a lot more difficult. You have to be briefer, you have to be to the point, you have to have a little bit of a marketing skill. So all of these are separate skills that you need to develop as you move from that VP to the CMO role.
I'm definitely seeing more CMOs involved. Well, they've always been involved with raising capital, always, but I'm definitely seeing it more and more and more, and being more of a CMO's role, involved in that investment kind of roadshow and trying to bring money into an organization. And it feels like when you progress up through the ranks and you get to a VP role, you've almost completed the medical side of your role. And then when you become a chief medical officer, you're learning, like you say, all these new skills, almost from like a business perspective, investment, like you say, marketing. Is there any advice that you would give someone who's looking to kind of make that jump, and how they go about perhaps getting ahead of the curve before learning on the job? Because there are some amazing VPs that I know who are transitioning into CMO roles, into small biotech, and they ask me these types of questions, what the differences are and how can they get ahead of the curve, what's it like? Is there any kind of advice that you could give from someone who's taking that step from a VP role in a big pharma and then into a small biotech company as a CMO?
I think preparing yourself. There are a lot of free devices that you can use, but the focus should be on business. What's happening with the other companies? How companies are being bought and sold? Who's getting onto the stock exchange and who isn't? And that kind of thought process, the business side of things, that you can do off the internet, subscribe to a lot of informational companies that give you business information, learn about business, learn about what's happening currently in the business, and learn how things are changing and moving in the bigger economic environment, and also the smaller biopharmacy environment as well. Focus on the business rather than on the science that you have to learn about, because it helps you present what the investors want, rather than it's very different from what the scientists want versus the investors from an informational perspective.
Yeah, okay. I'm sure they absorb information very different as well, an investor over a scientist. So it's good to sharpen your skills on how to make that presentation hit home.
There's also a lot of the companies, especially the exciting companies, have annual reviews where they present the state of their company. It's good to listen to a couple of those as well and see how other people do, what slide presentations they have, and then how they present it as well verbally.
So kind of doing your homework on almost your competitors, economic climate, looking into publications, that type of thing. Okay, cool. What would you say is the biggest lesson that you learn moving into a small biotech? What was the biggest thing that you learned?
For me, as the company gets smaller and smaller, it's the personalities that are really important. So you got to be very careful when you make that choice that your personality melds well with the rest of the executive suite and with the people that you're going to be working with. I think that the personality is probably the most important thing, in addition to the usual being excited about science, because that's what investors want to hear you give, and how well the company's organized and all the rest of it.
I think personality is a massive, massive point, and I'm glad you bring that up. And I think with any job move, if anyone's considering any job move, I think that being with the right people is just the number one thing that you should think about, along with the science of the organization, of course. But I think personality is massive, especially in small companies. So important, because you're interacting with a small group of people. So if you don't get on, you're in trouble.
There's nowhere to escape.
Yeah,
and it really is a daily interaction, and so you really need to be careful about that, because that can torpedo a relationship very quickly.
On the topic of personalities, I asked this question to Elizabeth Ullman on the last episode around kind of attitude versus experience, and kind of personality in this instance. Kind of following on from that, you've hired people into your teams throughout your career. What would you say, in your opinion, is more important? Someone's personality, someone's attitude, or their experience?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I probably personality, because at the end of the day, you can't change that very much. So if that doesn't work, you're in trouble. Experience is experience. You can always add experience or give direction. Well, I think if you forced me to choose between the two of those, I'd probably say that personality is the most important, because that's the one that I've seen again and again and again cause problems. If there's poor interaction between people.
Yeah, I do tend to agree. I've seen people give different answers, but I like how you kind of described you can't teach someone's personality. Basically, you can't teach their attitude, but you can teach them how to prepare an IND submit, or you can teach them how to do X, Y, and Z, but you can't teach them to be a good person.
I've tried it. It doesn't work well after a certain point.
Yeah.
You can maybe blunt the edges a little bit, but it's not going to change. primarily.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's something that we've tried to do here internally. We made that mistake of we were so fixated on hiring recruiters based on their experience and what they've done, and
Right.
the hires they've made. But actually, you know what? It comes down to someone's personality, and if you're a good person, and if you get along with them, because like you say, I can't remember what the stat was, but you spend more time with your colleagues than you do your family throughout your life. I can't remember what the exact percentage stats were. Yeah, so you got to get along with these people.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely.
So, in terms of going back to the pharma piece, which we skipped out, I'm sure you learned a lot there. What is there anything about kind of the pharma industry that you would change from a big pharma perspective in terms of kind of getting drugs approved? Now, I asked that question because there are like these minor changes that people could make to improve that kind of development cycle. Is there anything that you would change from the big pharma process to how things are done within a small biotech? Again, more context around the question. I hear a lot of the times that there's big red tape around procedures in big pharma and things can take a bit longer. Whereas in a smaller company, you can kind of hit innovation a bit harder because you can make more of an impact. So I asked someone this question recently and they kind of said, red tape sometimes just hinders innovation a bit and you can't be as kind of quick as you want. So if you could compare the two, what would you change, if anything, within that big pharma process?
The problem is that I know what I would change. I don't know how it could be changed. And what you said was absolutely correct. The red tape is horrific. The
Yeah.
the management upwards is a real nightmare because there's so many levels of higher management. So sometimes you make a request, you spend a lot of time putting a presentation together, sending it up the chain. It goes up the chain. It takes weeks and weeks and weeks. Then the decision comes back down, and sometimes the answer doesn't even seem to be related to the original question because it's gone through so many layers of scrutiny. And that's frustrating, it's inefficient, and it's just not very much fun. In a smaller company, you can go directly to your chief executive officer. You can go directly to the people who are going to make the decisions. You can have a decision made within an hour, and you can do it directly so that the question is well understood and the answer makes sense. And it's just so much faster, it's so much more interesting and so much more exciting. Some people, but that's just my opinion. I know some people who've been very happy in big pharma. They like the fact that it's very siloed. You just do your job. You don't care what's happening in accompanying disciplines. You do your work, you throw it over the fence, you get it done, comes back with a little bright box with a bow tied, and that's fine. But to me, that gets really tedious after years and years of doing the same thing. I don't criticize that. Some people enjoy it, and that's essentially the difference. There's a much more flexibility, a lot of more insecurity in a smaller company than a bigger company, but it's a personal preference.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a trade-off, isn't it?
it's a trade-off. So look, nothing's perfect, and for my personality, the small company is the way to go. Other folks are very happy in that very staid, very constructed, big pharma environment.
I was going to say, I think I'm biased because I only really tend to work with small companies, as you know. So I'm in the small company army of these guys that are doing so well. So yeah, maybe I'm biased. But would you say that is the one of the biggest kind of differences of a small company versus big companies is just that just quickness of being able to get answers?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Not just get answers. Taking responsibility, you take a lot more responsibility. If you do things, you can see the results of that immediately. Sometimes in big pharma environment, you can make a contribution, and then all the other folks have made a contribution. So when the final package gets sent to the FDA for approval, you know you've contributed, but you don't know how much you've contributed. Whereas in a small company, you know you've been a major contributor, you know what you've done, and you know how successful it is. It's a lot more satisfying, at least from my perspective.
So you'd never go back to big pharma then?
it would have to be a very attractive offer to go back to farm. It's really just too stale to find.
Yeah, well, if there's any headhunters listening to this, if you're going to approach Eliel about a big pharma gig, it has to be top notch.
Well, and
Um,
the other thing with big pharma is as you climb up the ladder, you do less and less of the day-to-day work, and you become more and more of a manager and an administrator. So you start spending your life hiring and firing and doing budgets, and that really is part of everyone's job. But to do that exclusively and to do that in that kind of environment is not very attractive.
No, definitely agree. It becomes less science driven. Well, it seems to become less science driven and like you say, kind of more budgets and finances, which is boring for a lot of scientists.
Right.
So thank you for going through that. It's really, really insightful information around kind of small companies and how they operate and your experiences. I want to just go back to, you mentioned you came into the industry quite late, and then you were kind of scrambling up the career ladder, and you've obviously managed to progress quickly into these different roles since you've come into the industry. So you're obviously a very motivated individual. What motivates you to be successful and to keep pushing yourself on? What's the kind of big driver behind Eliel?
I'm laughing, Jamie, because probably that was my mother. No, I'm only kidding. I just it's just I have I'm ambitious by nature, and I like to be on the top. I like to be I like to be the person in charge, not so that I can be nasty or cruel to everyone else, but I like the responsibility of being the master of my own fate. And the only way you can do that is by getting to the top of the heap.
Mm.
So it really, and it's the most interesting because you have to have the widest array of skills. You have to know about the actual science, a broad view of everything from early development all the way through to late development to approval and then post-approval development of the drug. So it's only that drives you to the top to be able to see and to really manipulate that big picture.
I think people with the best drive or the most motivation are the ones who kind of kick on, and there always has to be something in you to make you driven, and that changes for across the board. Some people are materialistic, some is career progression, some is something else. So no, it's interesting to hear from you and what continues to drive you, because you've obviously been very successful in your career. My kind of closing question, Elia, would be, what would be your number one bit of advice from someone who is considering moving from big pharma to small biotech?
Uh, to recognize that the environment is very different. They always every time I've looked at a small biotech, the people who are interviewing me have said, "Can you roll up your sleeves and just do day-to-day work and not just sit back in your desk, your comfy desk chair and give advice?" And I think that's the important bit, that you really need to do both. You need to do the day-to-day work, as boring as that might turn out to be, but that needs to be done. Whatever needs to be done, you don't have the people, you need to do it, and you can do your pontification if the people tolerate you. I think that those are the two important skills to have, that you can do that both. In big pharma, you just get given your job and you do it, whereas in small biotech you don't get given your job. You have to recognize what needs to be done, and then if there's no one around, you do it, or else you have to give it to somebody who can do it as well or better. So it's a very different way of looking at things,
Mhm.
and you've got to be a lot more flexible.
Hmm. It's definitely top advice, and I think that the whole cliche of rolling your sleeves up and getting your hands dirty is a cliche that recruiters throw around left, right, and centre. But That's definitely the case. So I couldn't agree more with that advice from someone that's considering making that change. And I know there's a lot of physicians out there that are considering making that change, and they might be a bit nervous about moving into a small company. But I hope today's kind of your insight gives a little bit more food for thought. And from my perspective, any advice I would give to answer that question, I would say just do it, give it a go. And most people really enjoy that fast pace, that opportunity to really make a difference. So if you're thinking about moving to a small company, do it, and I'm sure you'll really enjoy it. Any questions for me at all, or anything that you'd like to add on any of the points before I let you crack on with the rest of your day?
Nothing except to say you're a really good interrogator. You did a great job. Thank you, gentlemen.
I kept the questions easy enough for you, Eliel. I didn't want to put you under too much pressure and start and get you sweating. Eliel, thank you so much for being our third guest. Always a pleasure to pick your brains and hear from you. So thank you so much for joining.